am not well known for my gameplay of League of Legends, people know that for quite some time Bard has been my main. And so anytime I see him mentioned anywhere, I'm very happy. Unfortunately though, even though his bio was updated and he is in a really good place, the bio was quite short. It explained what Bard was decently well, and it even talked about why Bard looks the way he does. But we still lacked details when it comes to the overall purpose of Bard. In case you are not familiar with his lore, you can head to our video where we covered it. The bio is still up to date. But you won't need it too much because in today's video, the main character is going to explain what exactly Bard did to him. So without further ado, let's have a look at the story of how a Freljordian Bard met Bard, called Testimony of the Balladeer. You there! Yes, you! You look like a fine Demacian with working ears. One who might stay a stretch and heed the warnings of an old man who had seen the impossible. I am on a quest, you see, at the bidding of the wandering caretaker. And you can help. I must retrieve... well, it is best that I explain. Come now, don't shy away. Hear my tale, which is entirely true. I was first awoken by the clanging of bells, my mother's 200-year-old wind chimes, screaming outside beyond my window. She thought she was quite clever, my mother, convincing me their summer song would signal the coming of warm and sunny days. Even at my age, I could only count a handful of pleasant seasons in Valar's Hollow. Ha! An adolescence married to the endless chopping of firewood can attest to that. The night I speak of was no exception. A winter storm was raging. I jumped to my feet when my door burst open, and the rush of freezing wind filled my room. After scrambling to sheathe my trembling body in the thickest furs I owned, I made my way to the door, ready to slam it shut. But I hesitated. My mother's chimes were still screaming in the wind. Though they mostly stirred memories of my harsh and laborious upbringing, they provided me with a sense of connection to her. I should not risk losing them, or worse, suffer no sleep from their incessant wailing. Don't get me wrong, the chimes did have a certain appeal. Stories of how they came into my family's possession told of an incredible destiny and celebrated past. They were forged from ingot, war medals, some of the rarest in the Freljord. Whenever a battle had been lost and won, the collectors, my poor resourceful ancestors, entered the battlefield and retrieved what had been lost to rust in the blood-stained snow. How much ingot was out there, mother? I once asked as she gushed about ancient times. Centuries of it, she replied. What did the collectors do with it all? Sold it to the Winter's Claw, she said, shrugging, who made more weapons for wars to come. Then she paused for a moment and smiled, as her chimes began to sing. But there was always a little we kept for ourselves, to make instruments of life, not death. Indeed, those precious chimes were instruments that brought wonderful music to our land. Good fortune in bad times, she told me. I prayed for that fortune when she fell ill, but it never came. The wondrous caretaker was more concerned with his own wonderful music than helping the infirm, and I was left with her infernal chimes to remember them both by. I digress. Taking a deep breath, I pushed my way outside, but it was halted by an impossible sight. Floating in front of me, unaffected by the storm, was a small, translucent creature. Without wings or arms to hold it in place, it hung there, as if some eldritch magic had nailed it to a block of air. Two glowing white eyes like torches were affixed to its orbish head, and 3 twinkling stars in its belly began to churn and flicker. To my surprise, one of my mother's chimes responded, and, like a child's arm, it reached back to the shimmering creature, adopting its starry glow. But then, the chime cracked, and I heard its summer song deform. A fissure that was made edged its way up the chime's side, and specks of gold light were drawn out from within it, as if certain materials that composed it were being stolen away. Those were not lights the thing was stealing. They were my mother's tears, falling as this beloved yet irritating heirloom was quickly being destroyed. I would not let that happen, so I leapt into the blizzard and took hold of the chime. At its touch, I heard the blast of a horn in the distance. Why, I was not sure. I pulled back with all my might, but the creature's magic was too strong to overcome. And worse, I felt my entire body jerk skyward, and my feet left the ground. Soon I was hurtling into the heavens, towed to the clouds by the befouled Muppet. Crack! Another break scribbled its way down the chime. Then I saw something taking shape in the space between us. A shard, a piece of a whole, was materializing. Believing it would be the only thing to save me, I grasped it. As I reached, I glanced back to the wicked creature, only to realize that it had disappeared. In its place, hovering before me in all his mystic glory, was the wandering caretaker. It had taken an entire lifetime of prayer for him to appear, and, as my mother promised, the chimes brought him forth. The bard seemed to stare back at me, into me, curious of my being there, but it was too late to explain. There suddenly came a rush of wind and a wave of heat. I felt my arms stretch the length of a vine. My body followed, spinning and twisting, as I was being taken somewhere, an otherworldly place. As to where I ended up, my mother's old dulcimer here will aid me as I sing. The bells. 'Twas sound that hearkened visions of a place. Divine, bard's music just beyond the veil. A firmament revealed to me in space. In string and drum, a reed celestial. Bard opened up the cosmos wide to me. I felt beginning, end, and in between. Where waves had never stirred the lapless sea, we heard soul first prepare the stars to ring. No human witness had there ever been, but I alone did hear the act take form. That symphony changed me from within. My mortal body suddenly transformed. A spirit now, a Meeps celestial, ascended like the aspects in his dream. I sang with Bard throughout the sonic realm, and tended to his will a century. The bells, the bells, the bells. But then I heard a bell begin to bend, and felt a darkness silencing the song. I told my brethren and my master then, and travel all we did to right the wrong. And we were brought before the gaping maw, an empty soundless pit devoid of life. My ears beheld such darkness from beyond. It filled my soul with terror and with fright. I fear the hordes inside sang me a song, one that has no start, it only ends. For when I peered into the deep unknown, I felt my own music crook and bend. So I forced my ears above to the divine, turned back to what is good and what is right. But then I caught the rip, the void's divide, and soon beheld destruction of the light. The bells, the bells, the bells. In billions were the fragments, were these chimes, showered across the land when darkness split, the bell that tolls the rhythm and the time. Runeterra's hymn whose song may be forfeit. To close the door and bring the notes in line, the bard had sent us scouring the world. With every shard a stitch to recombine what the void had torn when it emerged. The bells, the bells, the bells. Soon I awoke in bed, a Meep no more, and back in Valar's hollow did I dwell. I tore my mother's chimes from off that door, and offered Bard more shards to fix the bell. Since my charge is to collect more chimes, through wind and rain and sun and land and sea, I pray that every treasure will rewind, that music that the void did play to me. The bells, the bells, the bells. Dear Demacian, I have come a long way and further still to warn everyone of the darkness that threatens to silence the music of this world. Runeterra is a bell, a world bell, that has been corroded by evil. Its fragments, its chimes, must be found to make it whole again. And our first step is to place all precious medals in your possession in my basket. I will take them, inspect them, sing to them Bard's divine music to remove any chimes of the world bell within them. Any chimeless pieces, I will, of course, return to you. No, wait, don't walk away. What I tell you is true. Please, listen, there isn't much time. The end of the world is nigh, and only Bard and his Meeps can save us. What a story. There is a lot to break down in here, so let's get into it. The Bard, the mortal Bard, came from Valar's Hollow, which you may remember as the trade settlement where Brand came from. Now, fortunately, even though we can't accurately pinpoint the age of Brand, this Bard does a pretty good job at doing so. Because here's the thing, at the end of Brand's story, he burned that village down. But since this Bard remembers the village being just fine, that means that Brand's story had to be somewhat recent. So yeah, these two could actually know each other. The Bard also mentions his ancestors, the Collectors, who went to the battlefields after each battle and looked for ingots of metal which they could sell to the Winter's Claw, where they could craft weapons from them. But the Collectors also kept some of the ingots for themselves, and they turned them into chimes. Of course, this is essentially giving lore to the chimes which you collect on Summoner's Rift when you play as Bard. You are looking for the ingots of metal that contain some kind of a mystical power. We'll get to that. In the story, the mortal Bard met a Meep who was breaking apart the chime, which was his only memory of his mother. That's why the Bard reached for it to save it. But as he touched the chime, he heard the horn of Bard, the Celestial, who then dragged the mortal into the heavens, and then, using his portally abilities, he dragged the mortal through cosmos to some divine realm, where the mortal got a vision from the perspective of a Meep. This entire story is quite a trip, but I don't believe Bard actually turned the mortal into a Meep. That was just a vision. And interestingly enough, he mentions how in this vision they traveled back in time, and they witnessed Sol, who was preparing the stars he wanted to craft. The Bard then mentions that he was the only one to see this, but that's not quite true. In the Twilight of the Gods, which was a story focusing on the Darkin, we learned that when the Shuriman Golden Army of the Ascended was on top of the world, during their Golden Age, they knew how to use the power of the Celestials, and they did the exact same thing. To quote the story, they rode the dragons of Twilight to the beginning of time. So something similar which the Bard witnessed was witnessed before by the Ascended of the Shuriman Empire. Anyway, on that trip, the mortal learned that the chimes contained pieces of some mystic power. It was something that was related to the power of Runeterra, which the Bard referred to as the World Bell. But more importantly, if you pay attention to the song, you may learn that whatever the pieces are which the Meeps are collecting from the chimes, they are part of a key that will help Bard seal void rifts. That's the point of all of this. Bard knows about the void, he knows how it's threatening Runeterra, and that's why he is wandering around. He is looking for a key to stop it, but as the song mentioned, the key was shattered to pieces when the void erupted in the physical realms. We are still not sure what this key is, but suspiciously it shares a story with the world runes. It mentions that this key was shattered into billions of fragments, showered across the land, just like the world runes. The world runes hold so much power they created Runeterra. But after some celestial accident that was never explained, somehow the runes were scattered across the land. It was hinted it was because of some evil celestial. But regardless, just like these chimes, the world runes were also showered across the land. So it is possible that whatever Bard is looking for may be related to the world runes. And maybe that's why at the end of Bard's bio it is mentioned that at some point he will have to pick a side. Obviously, some other celestial was toying with the magic of Runeterra, and now it's all wrong. So if there is an evil celestial, Bard will have to choose. Will he side with the celestials, or will he help mortals? Unfortunately, even though it seems like the mortal Bard rarely did learn the truth, unless he was lying just so he could steal medals from people, the story is just so crazy that it is highly unlikely that Bard will get any help from humans. At least not until the void actually starts to finally consume everything. But yeah, the key point to take away from all of this is really the main point of Bard that was mentioned in the bio. Bard traveled to Runeterra because while the rest of the cosmos was in harmony, this planet sang a destructive song. A song that was affected by another celestial. And I doubt it would be the work of Aurelian's soul. There had to be another Celestial who was toying with the essence of Runeterra. Perhaps it was Twilight. After all, the song also mentions the aspects. But to me, this sounds like a big fat teaser of a new Celestial champion that might arrive in 2 or 3 years. I've seen this a million times before. Whenever a random champion gets a seemingly random story, it is always a foreshadowing of a plan which Riot already has. So listen for bells, for a new Celestial might be coming.